Would you please join me in our opening prayer? Call to the Lord, who hears our prayers. Sing to the Lord, who delights in our songs. Wait for the Lord, the source of our hope. Worship the Lord, who is worthy of our praise. God of wondrous love, your miracles always catch us by surprise. Come to us now as we gather to worship, that we might be touched by your Spirit and made whole by your grace. Amen.
Good morning, Good Shepherd. Happy Sunday to all of you. This is the second Sunday of Pentecost, and my name is Sarah Keeling. I'm the lead pastor of Good Shepherd United Methodist Church in Dale City. And this morning we're doing many different things this morning as we worship God together. We are celebrating and honoring our grads, and so you will actually hear from two of our graduating high school seniors as they lead worship with us this morning. You will also hear from several other of our church members. Before I get to that, we'll have music by Jimmy Reed and Linda Teasley. And we're for the sermon portion, what would normally be a sermon in our services, we are having a conversation. And this is a conversation that has already taken place, that we recorded a couple of evenings ago. And we wanted to have this conversation about race and racial justice and the church and what that looks like. And we didn't solve anything or come up with any answers, but it's really just a starting point and something that we wanted to share with our congregation and with the community and whoever comes across this worship experience. And so for that portion, we'll be joined by Good Shepherd's founding pastor, Reverend Benjamin Pratt. We're also going to be joined by Pat Pearsall and Rossi Alston and Kobe Amankwa and Jimmy and Jolani Reed and Tom Smith. And if you know all those names, you know that we had a diverse group, and that was part of the modeling, is to just kind of show everybody what it looks like to have a conversation about something that tends to be a difficult topic and something that we all should have been talking about in more depth for much longer, really, than we have. And so we wanted to offer that conversation, and there's stories, there's a lot. And so you'll notice that was 8 people that I listed off. And when 8 people come together for a panel to share experiences and stories, it takes a while. And so that part of our conversation is about 2 hours long. And so I know that maybe you've got plans at 10 o'clock. If so, you can hit pause or you can come back to it, but it is something, it's not something that could have been shortened or edited or split up into chunks or anything like that. It's something that's important and it's worth all of our time. I'm mindful that if we had done this in person on an evening or something like that at Good Shepherd, that it still probably would have taken about 2 hours. But now you can pause, and we won't even know if you've left the room. But it's just really important, as I said before, and it's just a starting point. So as you are watching and listening, if you're thinking, well, I wish I'd been part of that conversation, well, I'm sure I thought of you, but at the same time we had to try to limit our numbers, or it would have been 4 or 5 hours long. And so, but we can do this more and again, and we can have these conversations in whatever forms and ways that we can do during this time. So let us go to God. Let us bring our full selves this morning and come to worship and to praise God together.
Surrounded by a great
Will you please join me in our prayer of confession? Steadfast source of mercy and grace, we long for you to touch our lives as you touched the lives of Sarah and Abraham. We yearn to laugh at blessings that are so unlikely we can scarcely believe them. We desire to feel in our very bones that no problem we face is beyond your care. Grant us the wisdom to put our trust in you and to offer you our songs of praise and shouts of joy. Amen. And hear these words of assurance. In God's faithfulness we are made well. In Christ's love we discover righteousness and peace. In the Spirit's sustaining power we find strength for the journey. Thanks be to God.
Would you please join me in our invitation to the Word? When trouble knocks, God answers the door. When despair comes to call, Christ shows at the door. When illness threatens to bring us low, the Spirit lifts us up. Our faith resides in God, for whom all things are possible. Our gospel reading this morning is from the book of Matthew, chapter 10, verses 9 through 23. Jesus is speaking here. He has just called upon his disciples and is sending them out into the surrounding communities. Take no gold or silver or copper in your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics, or sandals, or a staff, for laborers deserve their food. Whatever town or village you enter, find out who in it is worthy, and stay there until you leave. As you enter the house, greet it. If the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it, but if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet as you leave that house or town. Truly, I tell you, it is more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. See, I am sending you out like sheep into the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of them, for they will hand you over to councils and flog you in their synagogues. And you will be dragged before governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them and the Gentiles. When they hand you over, do not worry about how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you at that time. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated all because of my name. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next, for truly I tell you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Good morning, boys and girls. I'm a senior at Brookpoint High School in the class of 2020. We all know COVID-19 has taken a lot from everyone, even seniors. Right as I was supposed to be living the most memorable year of my life, it came to an end. But even though I don't get pep rallies or prom or chanting 2020 through the halls, or even a graduation, I can't be thinking like that. None of us can. I never knew I was going to be walking into that day of school knowing that I never was going to be coming back. A lesson has come out of that. You have to live every day to the fullest because you never know when it's going to come to a very sudden end. But we can't let that bring us down because God is always there for you to look up to. Thank you.
I just want to welcome everyone. This is our Good Shepherd United Methodist Church panel discussion around racial justice. And I am joined this evening by many of our church members. We have Tom Smith and Pat Pearsall and Rossi Alston and Kobe Amankwa and Jolani Reed and Jimmy Reed. And we are also joined by Good Shepherd's founding pastor, Reverend Benjamin Pratt. Our associate pastor, Mac McKinney, very much wanted to be a part of this conversation this evening, but he is having some complications due to cataract surgery, which has just prohibited his participation. But he wants us all to know that he is praying for us, thinks this conversation is of utmost importance, and absolutely otherwise would have been joining us via Zoom this day. So as we get started, I'm going to start with an opening prayer. And this specific prayer is an adaptation of a prayer that was created by Reverend Amy Stapleton. So let us go to God in prayer. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, it is indeed you that have brought us this far. As we gather together to discuss the important but difficult challenges, such as white privilege and racial inequality, make us mindful of the gift of life in spite of the hate present in the world. Remind us of the goodness of people in spite of the sins that we commit against one another, sins that come from brokenness and our own inability to see you reflected in each other. Forgive us, God, for the ways in which we have been complicit in creating anything other than the beloved community. Make us ever mindful to do the work of justice and be a body of peace in this world. A world ripped apart by conflict, war, famine, violence, guns, racism, classism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, ageism, genocide, poverty, and privilege. This is a new day you have given us. May we begin again and recommit ourselves to removing barriers where we find them, on state houses and in prisons, on mountaintops and in classrooms, on continents and in churches. We pray to you on this day and all the days ahead to keep us forever in this path. Amen. And so as we are getting started for this session, I will invite everyone to share just very brief introductions of who we are. So obvious things like your name, maybe which service you attend at Good Shepherd, because sometimes we're kind of divided by the 9:45 or the 11:15 crowd, though we're all online together these days. And then also, you may not exactly want to tell me your age or say that out loud, but I think it can be helpful to know at least kind of your generation and where you're coming from in that kind of way. So if you don't want to say your exact age, maybe at least the decade or two that you grew up in and came of age, and where you grew up, because not all of us, we are certainly not all from Virginia in this group. We're not even all from America, and knowing your location and what your community was like as you were growing up would be helpful. So we'll start there and then continue our conversation. So because on my screen, Tom Smith is next to me in our grid of squares. Tom, I'm gonna invite you, and try to unmute you, to go first.
Okay, I'm Tom Smith, and I attend both services. We prefer going to the second service because there's communion for the second service. I'm 72 years old, and I'm not for sure if this is a question about when I accepted the Lord or not, but I accepted the Lord at 17 and at 50, and I live in a very rural community in South Alabama. And racial makeup of the community was totally white, segregated. My school was totally white. and my church was totally white. So I'm coming from rural Alabama in a very, very white community.
Thank you, Tom. Hopping it down on our screen to Benjamin Pratt, if you could share, obviously we know your name, but if you could share a little bit about yourself and where you grew up and what generation you find yourself in.
I'm Benjamin Pratt, and I'm a hillbilly. I was born 3 weeks before Pearl Harbor attacked. I grew up living with grandparents until the 10th grade. My basic story that in many ways directed my life in so many ways was that my mother became an invalid because I was born. That's the family story that was given to me. And daily I watched her decline. I'm the first person from my family to go to college and then to graduate school and seminary. And I showed up in Dale City in June of 1966 when it was still the Methodist Church. It was 2 years till it became the United Methodist Church. And Dale Boulevard ended at Birchdale. And we were placed in a house in Ashdale. And I started knocking on doors.
And the rest is history for us at Good Shepherd.
Right.
Kobe, could you go next, please?
Yes. Hello. My name is Kobe Amakwa. I'm 27 years old, so I was born during the 90s, the early 90s. Originally, I'm an immigrant from Ghana, West Africa, and I came here around 5 years old, and we came to New York first off, and then I think we spent a year or two there, and then we moved to Northern Virginia in the Dale City community, and we've been here ever since. We joined the church in about, I would say 2003 or 2004, and just been going there ever since. I usually attend the 11:15 service, but I'm flexible and sometimes can be able to make both if I'm able to get up early enough. And I don't know, community, I've always lived in a multicultural community, I guess. Here in Woodbridge, Northern Virginia, I've just been blessed and privileged to not see, as much discrimination or xenophobia as in different parts of the country or world. So it's a blessing.
My name is Rossi Alston. I was sitting here listening to the other introductions, and the first thing that I did is try to figure out how old Reverend Pratt is. He used the Pearl Harbor bombing, and so I figured out that was 1941. So some quick math lets me know that he's going to be celebrating his 80th birthday here soon. So we'll be really excited about that. I was one of the families on the many doors that he knocked on back in 1966. I've told this story before, but I'll share it again. I remember this tall, redheaded guy walking down the street. My mother and father, being the nosy people that they were looking out there and saying, who is this man walking down the street, knocking on all of the doors? And he just continued to knock on doors. And the question in our family was whether he was going to knock on our door. And obviously he did. He came in, said that he was going to build a church in Dale City and that he wanted us to be a part of it. We were one of the first Black families to actually move into Dale City. And at that time, Dale City was probably 98% white. And I remember my mother and father talking about whether they wanted to be a part of this church that Reverend Pratt was building. And my mother and father came to the conclusion that if this man was going to be brave enough to knock on our doors, we were going to be brave enough to go to that church. And that church has become my church home ever since. And that was in 1966. I devoted my life to the Lord in that church. I've baptized my children in that church. I baptized my grandson in that church. I was married in that church. All of these things are part of my heritage with Good Shepherd United Methodist Church, and it's essentially all that I know. I'm a first service person sitting in section 52, and we enjoy on that. The section 52, for those of you who don't know, Pastor Sarah does know, is at least one of us who sits in that section is there 52 weeks out of the year. So we have named ourselves section 52. So we sit in our section all the time, and we enjoy seeing each other. And as I said, I've actually seen Dale City grow from a almost unanimous white community to a very, very multicultural community in the 50 or 55 years or so that I've been a part of the evolution of our community. And my experiences have been diverse, and my passion about being a part of Good Shepherd has always remained. And not to say that I possess the church, but Good Shepherd will always be my church.
Thank you. Pat Pearsall, Ms. Pat, your turn.
Pat Pearsall. I moved to Dale City in 1968, 69. So my door was not knocked upon by Ben Pratt because Forestdale did not exist at the time. And when I moved to Dale City, we of course did not have a church. We grew up in North Carolina, very small community, very segregated community, segregated schools. There was white portion of town and a black portion of town, and then a little country portion of town. So growing up Baptist, when I came here, of course, I searched for a Baptist church. The Baptist church was here on the corner, but the Baptist church did not seem to accept us. So we went from church to church trying to find one. We had very close friends because Earl worked at the Marine Corps base in Quantico, so he knew lots of Marines, and he knew lots of Black families. And the Walkers are the one who introduced us to Good Shepherd. And the first Sunday we came to Good Shepherd, it only took one time. And we looked around and we saw us. And in all the other churches, we saw either all us or we saw all of the white race. And we did not want to live like that. So Good Shepherd was very, very inviting. And I am a music fanatic, and that choir just blew me away. And I said, this is it. And it was a very, very loving experience from day one. And so I've been here many, many years. My age, I am in my 70s, which I am very proud to say that I am 75 years old. So I have been in this, I have only been in two churches my entire life. The Baptist church until I was 22, 23 when I left home, and all of the other years right here in Good Shepherd Church. So those are the only two churches that I have known. And I hope I went through all of my questions.
You're a retired school teacher too, so yes, you get a gold star. You did a great job there. Jolani.
I'm Jelani. I'm 17 years old. I've been going to Good Shepherd for 17 years. I grew up in a pretty diverse community, but for kindergarten, it's more sectional. Manassas is more like separated. Like there's more diverse communities and less diverse communities. So when I went to a school in kindergarten, I was the only Black girl in my class. But then we switched schools and there was like more people that looked like me. So I didn't experience, I guess, being different for that long.
And Jimmy.
I'm Jimmy Reed, and I'm 63 years old. I migrated from Liberia, West Africa. Was born there. Came to this country at age 23, I want to believe. And while in Liberia, I live in a very ethnic community. one race, basically, with the exception of missionaries that came and served in my hometown, United Methodist Church, as pastors, or sometimes for the Liberia Annual Conference as treasurer for the conference. And through that, I had some level of diversity because the Methodist Church always sent these missionaries, and then the school that I went to had a few Indians and Lebanese, which were the merchants in our country at the time. And it being a Black country, and everything in terms of power and structure was Black. Race never dawned to me, and I think I was colorblind until I came here. And then I got exposed to the race issue and other issues. We moved to Virginia from Massachusetts, having served there as director of music for 2 or 3 Methodist churches. And when I moved here, I actually got a job at Roberts Memorial before moving to Good Shepherd. But prior to that, we had some other experiences just as well with our kid, Lonnie, and then even with the church. As we went further west looking for a church to join, there was so much resentment. We were not accepted. And this was 1993. And I wanted to be a part of a Methodist church, but I couldn't find one that accepted us. And finally, when I got to Roberts, which is a historic Black church in Old Town Alexandria, we had a few whites visiting at a time, which didn't bother me at all because I just look at it like we are all God's children trying to make this world a better place for all. When I got to Good Shepherd, I saw a huge difference of diversity. It was more inclusive and not necessarily equilibrium in terms of race, but it represented a different culture of the Methodist Church. I saw something that I thought I could identify with, and the barriers that once hindered us were not there anymore. I've been there and worked there with the folks, and I find it very, very joyful in celebrating worship service. I found the music ministry well balanced because it's very inclusive in terms of the balancing of the music and the people that are there. So I consider it as a blessing to be a part of that congregation. And thanks to the vision, first of all, the instructions of God to Ben Pratt, who gave this vision to establish such a denomination, because this is one of a kind in the Virginia Annual Conference. And I'm grateful for that.
So, and we'll circle back to both of those things. Ms. Pat?
Yes, so could you tell us please about you and your?
I wasn't gonna forget.
Okay.
Don't worry. So I'm Sarah Keeling, and I'm the lead pastor here at Good Shepherd. And this is my second year here. I'm just about to finish up year 2, and July 1 will start my 3rd year here. This is also my 3rd appointment. My story overlaps with Jimmy's a little bit when you know, the Methodist world is kind of interconnected. And so, and Jimmy is on staff here as a music coordinator. And, you know, he mentioned Roberts Memorial. My first appointment was as an associate pastor of Washington Street United Methodist Church, which is also in Old Town Alexandria. And it has had an interesting, complicated relationship with Roberts Memorial because both of those churches shared the same mother church, which is Trinity in Alexandria, which at the time was also on Washington Street. And Trinity was a Methodist Episcopal church, and Roberts Memorial was then formed by some of the Black members who were both freedmen and slaves who left that church to form their own church. And then Washington Street was formed by, I believe they called themselves Southern Sympathizers. They wanted to form and be part of the Methodist Episcopal Church South when that split had happened in the 1840s, and moved right across the street from Trinity. and Roberts was formed about a mile south. And so that story formed my early years of ministry. I grew up in Orange, Virginia, which is a small town in Virginia, of course, near Charlottesville is usually kind of the best way to describe where it is. My dad's a United Methodist pastor too. Orange, when I was growing up there, it's a little bit racially different now, but when I was growing up there, it's predominantly white with a small minority of Black people, fairly segregated. I'm 39, so I grew up in the 80s, really kind of came of age, I guess, in the 90s. Like I remember, you know, there's Main Street, that's where our church was, on Main Street, an all white, very completely white church, parallel street running to that named Church Street, where like the Black funeral home was, and historically Black businesses and things like that. And so just not a lot of diversity growing up. I went to school at UVA, even though that's an international university with people from all over the place, it's still very majority white. And then I lived in Atlanta for a couple of years too. And so Atlanta, of course, is very different and very diverse. And so, but we'll talk some more about churches and that sort of thing too. So to kind of circle back to where Jimmy was starting to lead us, I'd like to invite each of you to share kind of what is one of your earliest, or it doesn't have to be the earliest, but what's an early memory that you have for yourself of race, maybe of being aware of your own race, or being aware maybe of someone else's race, but just kind of having that awareness. And I'll go kind of in reverse order. Jimmy had started to kind of touch on his experiences of that a little bit when growing up in Liberia, but if you want to touch on that, and then Jelani, I'll ask you to go after your dad, and then everybody will have a turn there too.
Yes, my first memory of race, actually, as I said before, I was colorblind. I never recognized it because of the area that I grew up in West Africa, Liberia, on the outskirts of Monrovia, the capital city. And we never had this kind of issue. When I came to this country after I got my first wife, Lady Ann, we had kids. And we had a child very young, little Jimmy. And we had an other experience in Central Falls, Rhode Island, a very white city, skirmishes of Blacks around. And when our son went to school, kindergarten, they actually put him in a box and put him in the center of the classroom and called him a monkey. And we took this to our next door neighbor because we didn't know what to do. We were not aware of the Urban League, we were not aware of the NAACP and all that stuff. Because Rhode Island is pretty much white. You have to move to South Providence before you get to know all of the other issues that's happening. And so we came across a missionary who adopted Jimmy through some organization, and they funded him to go to a Catholic school. And Jimmy went to the Catholic school. Of course, the Catholic school curriculum was a little bit kind of challenging for him. And he left from there and went to another school. But while there, he suffered a lot also because the race issue exists in that school as well. And then when we moved to Virginia, our second child, Lonnie, went to a little school in Burke. We live in Burke, and it's one of the prime area in Fairfax County. He established friendship with one of his friends at school. I think Lonnie was probably in the third grade at the time. And one evening, his friend mom asked for him to go and play with him. And so he goes there, and she asked us what time we're going to pick up Lonnie. And I said, 6 o'clock. She said, oh, that's fine, because it was summertime. 4 o'clock, we got a call from the police that they had our son. And I said, no, you can't have him because we're supposed to pick him up at 6. She said, well, we got to report that this child was in the neighborhood running around. And I'm like, what is this? That's when it just opened up for me. I'm like, as much as I was in denial of it and not to let it be a part of me, but I had to recognize it. And so we went home, pick up our child. The police were there at the house with our child in the back seat of the car. And the next day we called our pastor, Ted Smith. And he said, well, call the NAACP and see what they can do for you, Jimmy. I can't do much. And I did call, and the results were, when you're in the area driving, do you recognize the speed bump? Do you fly beyond the speed limit? And blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is a child, not 8 years old. He didn't do anything. Why should he be treated in this fashion? And then I got involved with the NAACP and the urban leagues and started attending some of these Black discussion, trying to fit myself in this new culture. And I think it's more, I wouldn't say, here in this part of the country, you have a right to speak and they recognize what you're saying and they try to do something about it. But further north, no, forget it. It's dead cases. You don't even hear about it. And I'm like, how do I deal with this? Well, we kept being the people we always been, open doors. We were friendly to our neighbors. They would send their kids over, play with little Jimmy and Lonnie. And it was wonderful. But I think all of us have had such awkward experiences with racism in this country. And when it gets to the church, this is where the issue really stands out. I always thought that the church was the last place. But I got to find out when I was in search for churches that some of the churches that I went to, we were not accepted. And that's heartbreaking. Even today, churches are not fully engaged into this discussion. I don't know what's the reason, but I think it's worth thinking about and being brought to the table.
And that's part of what we're doing this evening, to at least show what it's like to talk about this, because I think, at least probably from a white perspective, I think that there are people who would be surprised to know that Jimmy, you had experiences like that in the North, that you've had experiences like that in Northern Virginia, and you're only talking about in the 1990s?
Yeah.
And so that's part of the value of just sharing these stories, because so often people just don't realize it and are in that kind of denial, or are in denial that things can happen at churches too, or that people don't always feel, every church thinks they're welcoming and friendly, but that just isn't always true. So Jelani, you had mentioned, and Jimmy, just for everybody, you mentioned two kids. You mentioned Jimmy and you mentioned Lonnie, and then you have Jelani as well. And you've had a number of foster children.
Oh yes, I came up in a very poor community. One of the settlements in Liberia that slaves settled when they returned to Africa in 1822, somewhere around there. And I'm a descendant of settlers on my mother's side, and on my father's side, I am a descendant of the Aborigines. And so the mix is great, but we came to this country, before coming to this country, where I had opportunities through the Methodist Church to be sponsored in public school by someone way across the world in Oslo, Norway. Heard about me through the church, and I got good support for my education. And then we came to this country. One of the things that I felt that life has a call on its own, and we need to be able to recognize that call. My wife has a passion, and we both grew up in very, very large families, very, very, and not just biological. Both our parents included kids from the natives who were not their own, and we don't call them foster. Everyone is part of the family, basically. And when she got exposed to foster care in Prince William County, she just went for it. She is a great lover of kids, And we've had over 100 kids come by in our home. Most of them were able to rejoin their families. Some of them went to school. Some of them finished up school, and they're around the world, and they still keep in touch with us. And I thought that it's a way of us giving back. And we've had a very diverse group of kids come through. When they come in, it's like, this is home for everyone. And that's the way we live our life. And the joy we've experienced from doing this is just so immense that we just can't get away from it. We even went and left the kids a little bit. Now we're involved in the elderly care program. She has a great passion for that. Of course, she's a nurse, and she enjoys that. I thought I never liked it, but I find out I'm her right-hand man on this also. So it brings joy to both of us and give us a true reason for living.
Thank you, Jimmy. So Delaney, you mentioned kindergarten. Is that your first memory, or do you have an earlier memory or something significant about being aware of race?
Yeah, I was pretty much kindergarten, like walking in and seeing people had different hair than me, different skin color than me. But I never really experienced the type of racism that my dad had mentioned my brothers experienced. But it was definitely like, wow, I'm way different than everyone else, especially being the only Black child in the class and not having anyone to relate to. Yeah.
Rossi?
There are actually two experiences that come to mind for me. As I indicated, my family was one of the first families to move into Dale City, and I believe we were the second African-American family to move into Dale City. The first were the Truesdells. And when I came in, you got to keep in mind I was 8 or 9 years old. And when you're an 8 or 9-year-old boy, all you're looking for really is somebody to play ball with. That's the only thing that's really going through your mind. So I really wasn't sensitized to the racial issues that I was confronted with. But there was a family that lived at the top of the hill, and they had a little boy. His name was Kenny Kelly, and he became my best friend. Kenny's family was from Alabama, and Kenny Kelly was obviously a little white kid, and we became fast friends. And I remember one day we were just out riding our bikes, just having fun like 9 or 10-year-old kids do. And we were riding around the corner, and this kid comes down from the hill, and he starts running down toward where we were riding our bikes. And I was naive. I thought he wanted to play with us. I really did. And he came in, and he had this almost nasty look on his face, and he started yelling, "I finally found myself an N-word. I finally found myself an N-word." And I remembered that the words hurt, but I was actually more embarrassed than hurt because Kenny Kelly heard what this kid was calling me. And I, had the response that obviously a 9 or 10-year-old kid would have, is that I didn't want to lose my friend. I didn't want to be ostracized. I didn't want Kenny to think that he shouldn't any longer be my friend because of what this other white kid was saying. And I remember that it was just really hurtful. And I remember trying to act like he didn't say it, like it really didn't mean anything. But I knew that it meant something, and it sort of made me realize that I was different and that there were some people who were going to perceive me as being different. And it hurt. I remembered it hurt bad. Second time was something, and for those of you who remember my mom was a person who never really minced her words. She had an opinion about everything and wouldn't be afraid to actually provide that opinion. Reverend Pratt chuckling, Pat Pearsall has that look on her face like, I know exactly what you're talking about. But mom had strong opinions about a lot of things. And I remembered when I was in 4th or 5th grade, one of the teachers spoke with my mother and said, we're going to have to put Rossi in a special class because he's not going to be able to compete with the other kids in the class because of his background. And my mother never liked code. My mother never liked things not being said specifically. And so you're saying that my son is not going to be able to compete because he's colored. Now, back in those days, that's how we were referred to colored. It evolved to Negro, African American, but it was colored was the term that was used back then. And she said, you're saying that my child is not going to be able to compete because he's colored? And the lady said, well, it's not his fault. That was the response that she had. And that response, again, I'm an old head. I sort of like to listen to what older people say because you can learn from older people. And I remembered my mother started to get irate, and she never projected her anger at the woman who said it, but she grabbed me by the hand and said to me, "You will be the best kid in that class. You will be the smartest kid in that class, no matter what. Do you hear what I'm saying to you, boy? You're not going to let her hold you back because I know that you can do better." And again, it was kind of an interesting dynamic because she didn't express her anger at the woman who said these things, which were obviously unacceptable. She grabbed me and said that, "Rossi, it's going to be up to you to meet the challenge to overcome that stereotype." And mom didn't use that word, but it was the stereotype that was projected by then. It was almost a Forrest Gump moment that, oh boy, it looks like we had you turn out all right. And about 6-7 years later, that same teacher said, yeah, he was able to do a little bit better than we thought he was, because I was always a very good student. But I remember those two things. Obviously, there were other things that have happened to me as an adult that have been embarrassing, that have resensitized me to the color of my skin. But I will say this, Mom and Dad always taught us that to be considered half as good, you've got to work twice as hard. That's sort of how they taught us. And my brother and I both sort of accepted that mandate as to how we were supposed to live our lives as far as meeting the challenges that we have. So bottom line for me is I've always kind of known the color of my skin because of the circumstances that I've been forced to face from time to time. But it's important, and this is the message that I like to get to the younger people. Don't let it be something that holds you back. Don't let it start becoming an excuse for not trying to excel. You've got to get out there and show people who may have the wrong opinion about you, or maybe projecting a stereotype, that you are not what they think you are, that you're better than you are. And I take those attitudes from my mother and father. That's the way that they raised me.
Thank you, Rossi. Kobe?
Yes. I guess my earliest, or one of my earliest recollections of race was as a child in preschool in Bronx, New York. And I guess prior to that age, as I said, I immigrated from Ghana, and basically in my hometown was Tema, where basically we would only see one race, or maybe other individuals from various African nations, but you would never see individuals from different places or cultures. But I guess my first encounter occurred, kind of etched in my mind, because I was teased by my other classmates of my British accent when I was speaking English. And I guess my English was different from the English they spoke in that community. And I don't know, I guess I told my mom about it, and she was just funny about it, because as most of you guys already know, Ghana was a British colony before it was freed. And you would think English is English, you would be able to speak the same language, but I guess my English wasn't good enough for them. And I guess, I don't know, just seeing just the social difficulties and just poorly funded schools and all that served as a catalyst for my mother to know that, okay, we have to leave New York and go somewhere else to have a better opportunity to grow and to live the American dream, per se. So I think we moved there after 2 years, and we came here to Northern Virginia. And I mean, here it wasn't easy. I went to school in Neabsco Elementary. I went to Miles E. Godwin. It was changed now to Hampton, because Miles E. Godwin was a very controversial person in history. And once they're in middle school, you would always see, I don't know, everyone was just in their own groups. No one liked to integrate or play amongst each other. The Hispanics would be with the Hispanics, the whites would be with the whites, the blacks would be with the blacks. And it was very daunting, and it was very frustrating. But I don't know, I guess my experiences were luckily sports, and just, the International Baccalaureate program kind of brought me together with other individuals from different cultures and races. And I was just able to grow from there and value the multicultural society.
Thank you, Kobe. Pat Pearsall?
Yes, I have always been aware of race. Growing up in the South, in a segregated community, and I remember as a little kid, my mom died when I was 5 years old. So my dad raised his 5 children. And every Friday, we'd go grocery shopping. And my dad would say, now there's some things you could do and some things you can't do. And I remember I can see the colored sign and I can see the white sign on the water fountains and the bathrooms. And I did not understand, you know, why do we have to use different? I said, what's the difference? And my dad would say, because you are Black and Blacks and whites don't mix. I said, what do you mean don't mix? I didn't understand that as a child. And of course I wanted to use the one that I wanted to use. And he tried to explain, well, in this world, you know, there's a difference in race. And my dad didn't fight it. He said, you just have to go along with it in order not to get in trouble, because you don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to lose my job. We have to have food and we have to eat. So we just have to go along with the way things are. And I remember even as a child at 6 and 7, and when he talked about how the slaves and how the slaves worked and how some people worked in the house and some people worked in the field. And I said to my dad, I said, well, you know what? If I had been a slave and if I had been in the house, you better believe I would have put something in that food. I would not have accepted that. And even as a child, and my dad said, oh, you probably would, because I was a rebel. I didn't understand. So I've always known about race. But like I said, I never went to an integrated school. Even through college, we were still segregated. And in the 60s, when I went to school, it was when schools started to diversify and we had students from other schools and other states, maybe 1 or 2, to come to the college. So we had one white girl who came from Wisconsin when I was a freshman in college, and that is the only time I've ever been around a white person or lived with a white person or talked with a white person or whatever. And when I graduated from college and moved to Virginia, that's when I started to see it even more. Because even with my arrival in Virginia was terrible. So I've always known it, and I just never understood it. I never understood, but I just learned, my dad taught us to accept it, to not get in trouble so you won't go to jail, because he knew what would happen. But stories, oh, I could tell you stories, but you know, they're just the same typical stories. You're not accepted. I graduated, of course, from college. Prince William County went to my school recruiting, and they promised me that when I graduated, I would have a job. When I came to Virginia, I was so happy. Earl was so happy. We were so happy that Earl came to Virginia, bought a house in Forestdale, in this new community, this planned community that was built for diversity, that would accept people, bought this house. I moved to Virginia and went out to the school board, and they said, I'm sorry, we don't have a job for you. And I went, what? And the recruiter, I said what the recruiter said. They had my application. So it's just the typical story. And the only reason I finally did get employed in Virginia, I had to use, it wasn't the NCAA at that time, NCAA, but I had to use somebody in Washington, D.C. to tell them my story. And it was a man who lived in Dale City who worked in Washington that helped me get a job, because they just outright lied and said, you know, my application wasn't there, I never applied, and, you know, that kind of thing. It's always, race has always been a part of my life, and as a result, like since early on, I taught my son, as Rossi said, you have to be better. You have to work harder in order to be successful. You will not be accepted. You will not. And Black parents had to teach their children how to behave and how to act and what not to say and what not to do, which my dad did for us too as children. So it's just been a way of life. And that's why I just turned 75. And I remember 6, 7, oh, things are going to be better. As you grow older, things are going to be better. You get to be a teenager. Oh, it's going to be much better. See, things are changing. In the 60s with King and the marches, oh, we're going to be great. And you know, and I thought, oh, yeah. And now here I am 75 and I'm still waiting. And I thought, I don't know about this anymore, you know, or things. Yeah, things have changed, but in a way, they have not changed. And I look back in that segregated life that I lived, and once we became integrated, I see integration as being 50% good and 50% bad. Because when we were segregated, I think our Black children received a much better education than they did when we integrated schools. Because white teachers did not accept them. They sit them in the corner, or they do this or they do that. That would never happen in the Black school. You know, every kid, you worked with every kid no matter what. So it's been a struggle. It really has been a struggle, even though like I said, I have seen changes, but in the last few years, I've just had lots of bad thoughts and feelings because the hurt is just so deep. It is so deep. And at 75, I still cannot understand how somebody cannot like a person because of his skin color. I have never understood it, and I don't think I will ever understand it, even today. And I'm old, and with this latest incident, it has affected me more than any incident that has ever happened. And I think it's because George Lloyd was the same age as my son. And if somebody had come to me and said, your son has been killed, I know, I'm almost sure that I would have said, you know what? That's the end for me. It's over. I'm done. I'm not sure I would want to live anymore or be willing to live anymore. So this one has really hurt. Like I said, even though the prejudice and the race has been there the whole time, but because of today, I just still cannot understand it. Cannot. But it's time for somebody else.
Thank you, Pat. And when I asked Pat to do this, she was like, you know what you might get? And I said, I think it needs to be said, and I think people need to hear it. And I think the people who know you and love you at Good Shepherd don't always get to hear that and see that. And this is just why this is important. You know, that's your experience and your reality and how you feel. And it's raw and it's true. And it shouldn't be hidden and suppressed, or, you know, you shouldn't have to wear like a polite face or something like that. So, so I'll try to follow you. As I said, I grew up in the 80s, and so I'm not sure exactly what era we all decided that the best way to be a human being, especially in America, was to be colorblind. And to say that you were colorblind or that we were in some sort of post-racial America, though I think that that was probably later, more towards Obama years. But I grew up, singing in church, Jesus loves the little children of the world, right? Red and yellow, black and white.
Red and yellow, black and white.
I remember being like, well, who's really red and who's really yellow? And part of colorblind, I think, was to say, well, there's no real black or white because we're all just kind of different shades of brown and peach or whatever, or tan, and that we're not really different, right? We have this different colored, like, outer coating, like we're M&Ms or something like that. We're all exactly the same on the inside. And while that's true, as far as we are human beings and we are made in the image of God and we are all of sacred worth, it denies the fact that the world sees us differently. And then we have different experiences, as we can see right now in our conversations, just depending on where you grew up and how old you are and those sorts of things. And so growing up for me, race was something I felt like other people had. Right? I was just a white person in a white town, and that means I was just normal, right? So whiteness tends to define normalcy in America. I was just an average person. For me growing up, it wasn't really thought of as having culture even, right? Again, that was something somebody else has. We are just like the norm kind of baseline. There were Black kids in my class that I was friends with in elementary school. I think Kobe mentioned elementary school being kind of where people kind of divide up. We divided up racially, and then the white people divided again. We divided it by lines of music. I just remember this in 6th grade. People would have conversations of, do you listen to country music or do you listen to rap music? And again, small town in Virginia. So if you listen to country music, then they're like, oh, you're a redneck. And if you listen to rap music, it was like, oh, you're friends with the Black kids. And then you're a wannabe. And again, I was just a kid kind of in the middle, like kind of listened to neither type of music or whatever. But so just, it's like, oh, well, I'm just normal. And again, I didn't notice my whiteness so much as I noticed other people's generally Blackness for the people that I was around. And I remember looking around my community. I remember probably about 4th grade, being at a sleepover birthday party, and there was one bunch of girls, and one girl I think was Black, and I remember like the mom drove us all home, and noticing that her house was a lot different from the middle class homes that we were in. I remember looking around my community and feeling like Black people were poor, but thinking that I shouldn't be thinking that, but that's still what I thought I saw. I remember asking my mom about that. My mom was a history teacher, so she taught world history and US history and civics and all that kind of stuff. So, she was able to tell me that, it's, there are things, they're very complicated answers to your questions and things that are, not right and not equal. I didn't know why we couldn't join the pool, the country pool. It was like a private pool. There's only like one, not even a public pool, but one pool you could join in our town. And I asked my mom one time, I said, well, why aren't we members of that pool? And she said, well, when we moved here in 1984, they wouldn't let Black people become members of that pool. And so she's like, so we're not joining. I was like, okay. But again, like I'm tiny bit of activism on her part, which is great. But again, it just, race was not something that I thought of a whole lot. And when I went to college at UVA, I majored in anthropology. And that all of my intro to anthropology classes started with kind of a history of the field of anthropology, of the study of culture, and how it was an enterprise that started with colonialism and with Western European cultures, looking at all kinds of ways to document other peoples and other cultures that they discovered or encountered, and then creating a hierarchy of really creating an idea of race, but creating a hierarchy of people and who was considered civilized and who was considered savage. And of course, people who are considered savage, like indigenous peoples in America and Africa, then because they were savage, it was completely okay then to take their land or to enslave them. And in fact, you're making their lives better by enslaving them. And so learning that kind of history for me in college then just turned a whole bunch of different feels for what does injustice and oppression and inequality look like in America and in our culture, and just different kind of levels and layers of understanding that. And of course, that's still mostly an academic enterprise and not anything that's backed with a lot of personal experience. But yeah, that's so. So Tom Smith, tell us about Alabama.
Emma.
I said, growing up, I had very little experience with any Black people. Although I had a nanny growing up, but I didn't remember her. And my uncles, they had sharecroppers, and I knew that there were communities that were not white communities and around rural Alabama, but I really didn't think about it since I didn't come in contact with anyone. But then in high school, it was segregated. So the first encounter I had was in college, and there were not a whole lot of Blacks, but there were Blacks, and I could see that they were treated differently. They were perhaps being ostracized at that time. This was back in 65, 66. And then I went to college. I went into the military, and in my unit, there was no Blacks. There was a Spanish person. And so I had very, very little experience in my work environment. There was really no Blacks that I had come in contact, maybe one or two, but very, very few Blacks that I had encountered during my growing up, my military, my college, my my early work experience. And then I moved into Del City, into in the Cays, I forget the name of the street. And I joined the Lions Club. In the Lions Club, there were about half probably Blacks and about half white. So that was my first encounter coming into an organization that was composed of not entirely white people. And it was a great experience. And I guess one of my best experiences was attending Good Shepherd and seeing the diversity of the church. And I just love the diversity, and I still love the diversity because all my life I had not been exposed to that. And of course, I saw the news, I read the papers about, riots and man's inhumanity to man, but I wasn't a part of it. And, I saw it and I felt it, but I wasn't really integrated into that. And then in Good Shepherd, I had the privilege of hearing a lot of the beautiful Black ladies' stories and how they grew up and man's inhumanity to them, and what they had to suffer in their growing up and in their adult. It just really awakened me as to how man can be so inhumane.
Thank you, Tom. All right, Benjamin. And then for you, if you don't mind, same question as everyone else, earlier experiences of race. But then if you could also go ahead and start talking about what it was like to plant Good Shepherd.
Well, first of all, I'm very honored to be here and very touched by the honesty and clarity of the stories that I've heard from each of you. I grew up in a home with no books. One of my early life experiences was, I think it was the 11th grade, that I was given an IQ test. And I can still remember that the teacher came and literally knelt down next to my desk and said, "Ben, we have a little problem. There's no way you can score this low on this test and do as well as you do in school. So we're going to have you take the test again." I took the test and they never came back and told me anything. My conclusion was that I just needed to keep working as hard as I worked, but that I really was dumb. In the third grade, I moved to Erie, Pennsylvania to live with grandparents up there. And my father was an automobile mechanic. And his best friend at the garage was a colored man who he would often bring to our little house, who would sit at our table and have coffee with my father. I just remember that very sweetly. I played ball with and against folks of another race. But it really was not until I was in seminary in the 60s that, of course, the turmoil was really starting in our country, and I was becoming very mindful of racial issues. I think it's very important to know that when I moved to Dale City to plant the church, as you say, I was 25 years of age. I was still basically of the belief that I was dumb and just had to really work hard to do my work. Sarah, pastors are trained differently now. I was trained in Bible. I was trained in church history, a couple of other important subjects. But when I came there to start the church, I think I had preached 3 sermons in my life. I had conducted no funerals, and I had conducted 1 wedding. And the people I began to meet, many of them I think were older, some were exactly the same age. I was experiencing so many of them as gifted people. And I mean the people of the white, the black, the people of different, they were all very sharp, successful people, was my experience. I guess my prayer every morning was, Lord, help me to be respectful and to listen to all of these people very carefully. Minu Kim, who worked at Good Shepherd for a couple of years, came to Fairfax Methodist Church, and when he got there, his job was to start a new congregation, and he wanted it to be a multiracial experience. And he came to me and said how honored he was to have worked at Good Shepherd, and he wanted to know how I did it. And I said, Minu, I don't know. I've thought about this at great length. Planting is a good term for it. I think it was an organic experience that came out of the people. All I know is that I admired and respected and sought to be a giver to the people that I met. And somehow I was able to communicate a kind of a warmth and understanding to people that they came. And when I believe it was the 50th anniversary and some folks came from great distances, Roger and Mary Jane Palmer, Mary Jane said to me, Ben, when we left there and moved back down to North Carolina, we thought we need to find a church like this. She said, Ben, there aren't any. She said, it was so unique. And she said, and you had this amazing gift that you somehow knew who to ask to do the different jobs, like me for the choir. And nobody could say no to you. You somehow got us to do these jobs. And there were incredible people who came along. You know, many of the military people who helped with the education program. So it feels like it kind of just grew out of the people. And my career changed, moving from the local church in some ways after I averaged about 80 hours a week as the pastor at Good Shepherd. And that was not good for my marriage. And I was also experiencing a lot of requests for counseling. And I went and did some specialized training, and those people had offered me this job. And I was really wrestling because there were people who were so impressed with how successful Good Shepherd was that I was being told I was going to become a bishop. Well, I decided I wanted to be married and the parent of my children more than I wanted to be a bishop. But that was a very difficult decision for me. I remember the years at Good Shepherd as formative, growing, beautiful, loving experience. I grew in countless ways, and I grew because of the people who were there, who taught me and shepherded me through so much of that time. I think one of the most important things I did was I read Alan Payton's Make Me an Instrument of Thy Peace. And for me, that became the pivotal prayer. And I think for many of the years as the pastor there, every service closed with a benediction of sort in which I told people they were the ministers of this church, I was the pastor, but they were the instruments to serve in their community and in their work. And that continues to be the prayer of my daily life, to be an instrument of God. Maybe you all have specific questions about that time back then that I can speak to. I could go on for a long time.
I think it's remarkable, and Benjamin, you and I have had this conversation too, that you know, when you think about it, like, come on, this was 1966.
This was right at the heart of it.
And you were sent off to a new residential community that was going to be built and already integrated as it was being formed, and to build a multiracial, multicultural church. I mean, that you did that at when schools were supposed to be integrating, and they were dragging their feet not that far away in other places in Virginia. It's remarkable to me to reflect on that history and to think about the fact that this community was able to be formed and to become what it was then and what it is now, because it still is this diverse, multicultural community. And then the sad part for me as a pastor, really thinking about this, is that this is still a very unique church for Methodism, for Virginia. I don't have the statistics, but there are not that many diverse churches. And the official definition of a diverse church is one where there's 20% of a different kind of ethnic makeup. So if you might still be a predominantly Black or Latinx church or Korean, but if you have 20% of another culture or more, then you're technically considered multicultural. And of course, Good Shepherd's percentages are higher than that. Mm-hmm. And many churches are trying to be multicultural, But it does seem that once a church is formed, that it's really hard to change. It's really hard to kind of bring that in, or it feels forced and artificial. And people can know that.
Reverend David Bonney, got into the conversation that I was having with Manu, and David said he thinks that the founding pastor of a church sets the tone somehow, and for it to change over after many years is extraordinarily difficult. And so whatever we did back then, and I don't think I was, yes, I was an important hub at or part of that wheel, but we tried, the leadership was diverse, and I just had such enormous respect for so many of the people from every walk of life.
There were two very interesting points that were made as we were sort of going around the squares, and one of them, there were a lot of excellent points for everyone, but one was made by Miss Pat, and another one was made by Reverend Pratt. The Reverend Pratt comment was that Good Shepherd happened organically, and you can't sometimes force things to happen. Good Shepherd happened. It was the right thing at the right time, and has managed over the last 50 years or so to maintain its heritage. And so saying that I want to start a church like that is not as easy as it sounds. These things
right.
happen organically, and that's important. And Ms. Pat made an interesting point, and you all know that I read a lot, and I try to keep up with things. And the point that she made earlier about African Americans being more successful when we were segregated as opposed to integrated is right on point. I don't know if you all know these statistics, but these days, most African American children are raised in single families. That was not the case in the 30s to the 50s. Most African American students are not graduating from high school statistically. Do you all know that from the 30s to the 50s, African Americans graduated at a higher rate from high school than they do now? So that tells you that things are not going the way that people envision. Now, I'm not saying that we should be segregationists. Segregation was for an evil purpose. But I think what's been lost when we have integrated is the focus on allowing people to achieve in an environment where they have the opportunity to achieve. And I think that's where we're sometimes missing the point. Things have to happen organically. Things have to happen as they're supposed to happen. And most important, we have to have conversations about these things. One of the things that's most frustrated me during these times that we're living in now, particularly with what happened to Mr. Floyd, is that we have a lot of people getting together and discussing these issues. But if you look at the discussions, for the most part, it's one race or the other. Black people all getting together and talking about it is helpful, but it's not going to be able to provide any sort of solution. White people talking about how they're going to solve our problems is not going to accomplish anything. There has to be an integration of the conversation so that people can understand the importance of the dialogue. So I really appreciate this forum that we have here, because we have the young, we have the not so young, we have people of color, people who are not of color, people who are coming in with experiences. Some of the experiences that Ms. Pat went through almost broke my heart. You know, just hearing those things would just nearly broke my heart. About what happened to Jimmy's son, where he was put in a cage and was treated like a monkey. To me, that is just, if that doesn't pull at your heartstrings, you don't have a heart. And so those are the types of conversations we can have, and it's easier for Reverend, easier for Tom, easier for Sarah to be able to explain it to people who look like them than maybe it would be for, say, me or Jimmy or Joanna or Kobe or even Miss Pat. So it's important that we have these conversations, and not just conversations stop here. We need to go out and share these conversations with ones who have not heard the word. I'll stop at this point.
Excellent statement, Rossi. Excellent.
Yes, Pat.
But the difference today is this. When Ben Pratt went in that neighborhood, he basically had black and he had white. That was what it was all about. Now, how many cultures and races do we have? I don't think it is possible. The only way we can have a diverse church today is for that church to start with diversity. For us, for a church today, for a Black church or white church to say, let's get some diversity in here, I don't see it happening because people are used to their own church and their own way of worshiping. But this church grew up together, starting together, worshiping the same way, incorporating both kinds of worship and all kinds of worship. But as far as getting the churches to be diverse today, I just don't see how it can happen or will happen, because within our own church here, we had a church who would come in after us, Hispanic church. And then we had a church, there are other churches that have Korean churches. And then we have Black United Methodist churches. When Virginia got on this kick a couple of years ago, let's combine or let's have some diversity in the churches. And I was so opposed to that, because at Bethel United Methodist Church, instead of saying, okay, Woodlawn, come in with us at 10 or 11 o'clock and let's worship together, Woodlawn would come in after they were gone. And I thought, what good is that? That's not diversity. You're not worshiping together. So it's a difficult thing to do, and I'm just not sure. Like I say, I'm 75 now. I don't think it will happen within my lifetime, but I do know the reason why. Language is a very good reason. We can't get Hispanics in here if they don't speak English and if we don't speak Spanish. So I can understand the problem with diversity, and it's much more complicated than we seem to try to think. Yeah, we're just going to have a diverse church. It's not as easy.
I see you, Tom. And I was thinking about Rossi's comment about I don't have a super informed opinion about this, but I'm thinking of the failure of integration in certain areas, right? Like that maybe just saying, okay, we're going to end segregation, everybody's going to be all together, then people get ignored, right? And they're not valued, not seen, not listened to. And I think that happens in the church sometimes. So if you have a church, let's just imagine that it's predominantly white, and they're looking around their neighborhood and they're like, well, our neighbors look different than us, so we need to figure out how do we get them in here? And it usually means things, because I have served churches that say this, like, well, we don't mind new people, but they better like the same music we do. We don't mind young people, but they better not come in and change things. And so then that's a form of like, well, let's be together, let's be integrated, but please be exactly like us. And that's part of the failure, I think, of the idea of being colorblind, where, okay, we're all the same. Well, we're not all the same, because society doesn't view us the same. And we need to be able to see differences. We need to be able to point out differences, celebrate differences, examine differences, to be like with Benjamin Pratt, maybe the IQ test isn't the best thing for everybody, right? Maybe the SATs don't work for everybody, and maybe there are a bunch of different reasons for things like that. So, Tom?
Yes, I'm just wondering why Bible-based, non-denominational churches seem to do a lot better job of bringing in people of different races and different cultures. If not branded, they're not a Methodist, they're not a Baptist, because maybe that's the way they start, and that's what we're saying, they start that way.
I don't know. I know, at least for myself, some of the larger mega churches that I have attended or been more aware of aren't necessarily more diverse. So I don't know if that's something more of what you've seen in this area. So I would say, if you look at, so this gets into kind of like, what's our responsibility as a church, as a part of Methodism? The United Methodist Church, globally at least, is one of the most diverse denominations. But come look around our churches, especially in Virginia, and you'll see that obviously most of them are not diverse. Most of our Virginia United Methodists are white. Most of our clergy are overwhelmingly white. And we know this is a problem, and we point it out to ourselves and we talk about it, but we don't always know what to do about it. And I'm not suggesting that we begin to solve that kind of problem right now. But, you know, our denomination has a history of racism, a history of splitting over the issue of slavery, over the issue specifically of clergy being able to own slaves, and splitting in the 1840s. And then coming back together in the 1930s, but still being segregated, and then fully coming back together and getting rid of the Central Conference, which was the segregated conference in 1968. And so often we have conversations about the church and where we've been and how far we've gone, and we kind of bookended it in 1968, and we're like, we're done, we're good, you know, we can close that chapter on race and then move on, and we can talk about gender and women, and we ordained women in 1956, so we're good, we can close that and let's move on. And we act like those are done conversations when so clearly they are not.
Sarah, it might even be as simple when we reach out to people to be part of our church, is to reach out and mean it. I know that when Ben Pratt knocked on my parents' door in 1966, they invited him in the house, and he didn't just say, hey, I've got a church that we're building on the corner down there, I want you to come. He sat down in their dining room. He talked about how they would be accepted in the church. He made sure that they would be comfortable in the environment and assured them that this was a church that is welcoming to all people. You can't just say it. You've got to go ahead and sell it. It's important with Christianity, I think, is that we don't do a good enough job selling what we believe. We expect people to be able to follow through on what we do because we've been blessed with the knowledge and the spirit and the grace that comes with having a relationship with the Lord. But we don't do a very good job selling it. We don't follow up on people. We don't make sure that people feel welcome. So that's where we have to take the next step. If we have a person who happens to be Korean who comes to our church, we got to make a point of going over to them and making sure that they understand that we're excited that they're there and that they're sharing the Sunday with us. I know my mother was crazy about whenever she saw somebody new, she would get to them before they got out the door. They would barely get to Ben before she was trying to get them to join our church and join some sort of committee. And that's the sort of selling that we have to do. Now, we're not going to be able to sell to everybody because people that would go to church are like all consumers. They're looking for certain things. They may be looking for some for the children. They may be looking for something more spiritual. They may be looking for the music. They may be looking for something that we don't have to offer them at that particular point. But we got to go out there and sell what we have. And the good thing about Good Shepherd, what we have to sell is our organic, natural diversity. All are welcome. And so that's the way that you've got to sell it. And I don't think that the Methodist Church is ever going to accomplish the objective that we're talking about. The Baptists are not going to accomplish it. The Catholics are not going to accomplish it. The bottom line is nobody's going to be able to accomplish it. It has to happen organically, and people have to want it to happen.
Well, and I think
it's a matter of that. In the past, the word was tolerate. You must tolerate other people. Well, it's more than tolerate. I mean, you tolerate a lot of things. There's a big difference. Churches would tolerate Black people coming. Oh, we accept them, but they accept their coming on Sunday, and then they come back the next Sunday, but are they doing anything? Good Shepherd, since the very beginning, they more than tolerated you. They made you accepted. You were accepted because I am the example. I told you that choir blew me away. So I go up to Mary, Virginia at the end of the service, and I said, this music was just outstanding, and I just loved this choir. I said, what do you have to do to join this choir? Can I come in for, what do you call it when you try
Audition.
out the choirs?
Audition.
Auditions. I said, when do you have auditions? She said, what? What do you mean? When do we have? You don't audition. If you want to sing in the choir, you sing in the choir. You come to choir practice on a Thursday night. I said, no matter what? Without even hearing? She said, no matter what. You just come. Because a lot of people in the choir, they were like professional and they really had studied music and all that. And I knew I hadn't. And I thought, you figured for a choir to sound like that, you had to be. But she said, no, you just come. And that was day one when I came to this church. And when you look at the administration and the officers and the Sunday school teachers, it was inclusive. It was inclusive. It was everybody. So that's why I think it just has to be that way from the beginning, a total acceptance rather than just saying, okay, we've got 10 people here, but the 10 people come on Sunday. But I do believe, and I know we're not getting into our church discussion yet about race and how it's working, but I do believe that that's where we need to work a little bit, how to get all of the diversity working together and doing more. You know, we don't really take advantage of the diversity that we have here. And I mean, it would take a lot of work and it would take this. How can we do this? Yeah, we have the different kinds of music and we have the different kinds of holidays, but I am opposed. I love Black History Month, but I don't like the fact that every year we have to have a Black History program, because I think we need to have a Black History program all year. And I think we have to do another kind of program all year, not just a designated month. I understand why it happened, and I understand that it still needs to happen because people do not know Black history. And the only reason you get to know it is you have to be taught. But I think you have to live it too, and you don't isolate it, you know? So I think as far as our church, we need to get together more and interact more with that diversity. You know, we do it a lot, especially with the music and, you know, with the lessons and the sermons, but it is a difficult job, and it's very, very. And right now, we're talking.
And I would say that many whites do not know white history.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the books that I've read recently is called Waking Up White. Many people who are white don't think they have a race. And so they always thought there were people in other races, but they weren't part of a race. They just are the norm or whatever. And there's such, I mean, and then to look carefully at what we white people have done in some unbelievable ways, like the GI Bill was not open to African Americans. The fact that we had a recent vote on making the federal lynching law, 4 people voted against that. I mean, it's those kinds of things that we need to pay attention. It's part of our complicity in what is happening. And I want to ache about that, because that's a piece of us, which means it's a piece of me.
And you know the reason why Blacks didn't get the GI Bill, and it wasn't the overt racism. Let me tell you all how it happened. Well, the GI Bill was administered through Congress by a congressman from Mississippi. And he decided that what was going to happen with the GI Bill is that it was going to be administered on the state level. So what did you have? People in Mississippi and Alabama making the determinations as to who would be able to benefit from the GI Bill. In the first year of the GI Bill, 1,000 people applied in Mississippi and received the GI Bill. 2 African Americans received the GI Bill, when there was a disproportionate number of African Americans who had served in the service and who were qualified for the GI Bill weren't able to get it because the local people would prevent them from being able to get it. Even things as subtle as postmen failing to deliver the mail to the people so they could fill out the applications. That's how this subtle racism permeates what's going on and takes away people's opportunity to advance themselves. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Reverend Pratt.
No. That's you've just underscored exactly what I'm talking about. That's right.
I want to plug in something here about the national motto for the United Methodist Church: open hearts, open minds, open doors. I That's a very strong and powerful statement there for a church or organization to have, and yet not living it, based on the experience and how we live. And the church, I always felt since I've gotten older, I see things differently. And I think it's just because of the fact you grow older, you grow gracefully, you grow wisdom, and obviously you see things differently. I really believe that that statement is misleading. It's very, very much misleading for the church, and we can't be the Church of Jesus Christ trying to seek souls for Christ, having such a strong, powerful statement and can't live it.
Right.
The sad thing
I think,
is that it was a marketing campaign thing. So it wasn't anything that everybody had the opportunity to really develop and adopt. And it's aspirational, at least it's how it should be. But it's really bold to stick that on all of your church signs and everything, and then have people have wildly different experiences. Rossi, I saw your hand, but you're still on mute.
Yeah, I'm going to share something that someone said to me today, which was kind of interesting. And I can share this without violating any confidences. One of the other judges in our court was calling me up about something today about, things that are going on in the pandemic and, the adjustments that we've had to make as an institution, as part of the judicial branch of government, and the things that we needed to do. And this particular judge said to me, she said, Rossi, I just want to let you know that I am very proud of you and how you have come in and been a part of what we do here, and that you've mixed well in, you get along with everybody, and it's a really great thing. And I'm going to tell you the truth. With you being a Trump appointee, I was concerned about the branding associated with you. I'm pleased to say that you're a great guy. And when she said it, it was like one of those backhanded compliments, like, all right, I expected something different. I got this, and I'm really happy about it. It's almost like saying, I don't really get along with Black people, but I really like you. How many of us have heard that one? And it was almost the same thing, is that people make the mistake of branding you before you have an opportunity to show what you are and who you are. And we have to be careful as people, particularly those who find our foundation in the love of Jesus Christ, to make sure that we don't brand people. We have to make sure that we understand that people are different, and that we might have to make a little bit of an effort to try to find out what is important to them, so that we don't put them in our own little pocket or little socket or slide or whatever. But we need to make sure that we understand all people and give all people an opportunity to at least explain what's important to them, and not necessarily brand people. And that's a big mistake that we make in these days, is the branding of people. Not all African Americans are bad people. Not all white people are bad people. There's some good African Americans. There's some bad white people. There's some good white people. We have to kind of figure that out, and not just sort of put everybody in a category. When I look at a white person, I don't think they're naturally bad. I say, okay, I'm going to see what this person's about. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to find out if they're a good person. If I meet a person who happens to be of color and who looks like me, I will say that I will probably initially give them the benefit of the doubt because they look like me. That's just instinctual. But the bottom line is, I'm going to still try to figure out if this is a person that I like being around, that is someone who's going to be a friend to me. So again, we have to be careful about branding people. And I think that as Christians, it's important that we realize and appreciate our responsibility in that regard.
But in our church, Ben, when you first started, there was never an issue, was there, about race or people being accepted, or the conversation just never came up, or did it?
Not to my knowledge, Pat. I don't remember. One of the things that it's important to remember is that we had a lot of people from a lot of different traditions who joined that church. And so we were a lot of people needed to learn about Methodism. But I think that was more of an issue in some ways than it was about the racial issue. I really don't remember the other way. So.
And since I've been here, to my knowledge, I haven't seen the racial issue or problem. Now, if it existed, it was maybe under the table. Rossi is smiling and laughing. But if it did exist, it was only in maybe situations that I didn't know about.
Yeah, I
Actually, there's really only one that I really know about, and it happened, oh, I don't know, 5-10 years ago. And I don't want to call names or family names, but it was simply about a comment that one white person said about the Black person. And it was simply a comment like, you all believe this or you all believe that. And that comment was taken very, very offensively, but that is the only time that I ever knew that anything like that happened. And it did become but not everybody knew about it. Not everybody knew about it. But that is the only time that I ever know of anything that happened like that. And his family did end up leaving the church.
I'm not going to call any names, but there was one instance where a white person in the church tried to talk about the experiences of African Americans during Black History Month. And an African American was offended because their point of view was that a white person cannot talk about the struggles that we have had as African Americans. So it was a pretty intense situation and circumstance.
So where did that take place? In a meeting or in a Sunday school class or just between individuals or what?
It took place in worship.
In worship.
Yep.
Yeah.
You mean the discussion?
What's the interruption?
Yeah, the genesis or the foundation for the discussion came from something that was said in worship.
Okay.
Just to interrupt, I thought, Jolani, did you have a hand up earlier?
Oh, yeah. I was basically just trying to say, like, all these things. I haven't experienced it because obviously I wasn't alive yet. But just to bring some hope for the future, I know Miss Pat said, like, she's 75 and it's still happening. That although it's hard to change, like, the heart of a person or their views, we can start changing them now. And it starts with, the young ones. And so I think talking about this, like hearing all of your experiences and stuff, it really helps to start as a catalyst to fix the problem. So yeah.
Thank you.
And I want to ask the pastors about this race thing. I sometimes get confused. I've prayed about it, asked God to give me a better understanding without being angry. Of course, there's anger. And since I have this platform and opportunity to speak about it, because even within the Black race, there are issues. And we who come from Africa, sometimes Blacks born here, where this place is their actual home. This is their home. They have built this country. They feel that we don't support them enough. We do support them, but most Africans refuse to get engaged into the depths of the issues because it becomes so violent. And when you see the kind of response that you get of the inhumane of human being treated, you're like, I've heard it from a lot of my African friends. I'm not going to fight back because I got a place to go back home that calls home. Yes, we support the fight, but most time we just can't get into it.
Benjamin.
Because we could get caught up in this thing, and then we look at the scripture, even the scriptures, where in this Bible all this thing come from. And I like to quote something that I read just recently. And I was looking at the question posted about biblical justification for racial justice. I'm like, where is it in the Bible? And to me, I said there's none, and there shouldn't be any. And then it goes into still what matters to God is all humankind and a just world for all. According to the Bible, Genesis 1:26-27, which clearly outlines, then God said, then God said, and now we will make human beings. They will be like us and resemble us. They will have power over fish, the birds, and animals, domestic and wild and large and small. So God created human beings, making them to be like himself. God created them male and female, sharing equal status as human beings. God did not create a race, racism, superior groups over human rulings in ranks and dominant of social culture.
No, human beings did that, right? Race doesn't, it's a social construct, right? It's not, it's purely based on society and culture and one particular culture trying to show dominance and superiority over others. And that's, you know, this isn't, and what's going on right now, this is not a black versus white issue, right? It's like all of us versus racism. What can we do to fight something that is systemic, something that is structural, something that isn't, that we are all a part of. I've been reading a lot of different things lately, and one of them is to think of racism as like the water that we're all swimming in. And basically, like, we're all wet, we're all affected by it, and that's just kind of where we find ourselves in having all of these various conversations and understand things and trying to move forward. And in the church, we have a language for these kinds of things, right? For structural injustices and things like this, we call it sin. We have individual sins, but we have these huge structural, communal, societal sins that are passed on from generations to generations. And we deal with those by, first of all, recognizing that sin, asking for forgiveness, confessing that sin, repenting, and then working to do better, and working to have these conversations and to hear the stories and to figure out what we need to do, as a church, as part of God's kingdom, as this church for all God's children, to make sure that, everybody who is already a part of our church, everybody who comes to our church has an opportunity to experience the welcome and inclusion that all of you have felt. Not just, it's okay that you're here, not just tolerated, but what does it look like to really embody the kingdom of God, and to mean it, and to take risks and be vulnerable, and to understand that people are going to say things that are strange to us maybe, or that we don't understand, and we need to be curious, and we need to be willing to read and talk and educate ourselves and just kind of figure out, just because I know my experience, because I live in my body and this is my experience, and these are the shoes that I wear or don't wear, and and to know that, like, but other people are having different experiences, wherever you're from, wherever you've grown up, and there's a challenge there and a responsibility there.
That's a great point. I'm going to share something that I learned at a class that I took
I'm going to
on.
excuse myself for a minute.
We'll wrap up soon here too. I promise. It's getting late.
A class that I took on capital murder prosecutions, and it was a class that was being taught to defense lawyers who were representing people who were charged with capital murder. There was a sociologist that came in, and she said that if you're representing an African American, your first instinct is to get rid of all white men who are 60 years of age or older, because they're not going to have any point of view or reference to your client. So the instinct for a defense attorney is to get rid of all the white men that you can between the ages of 60 and 75. But she said there's an interesting statistic or an interesting study that she did. And what she did is she went around and looked at the homes of 300 white men who fell within the age bracket of 60 to 75. And she found out that over 80% of those white men had somebody of color on the mantle of their fireplace, whether it was an African American, an Hispanic, an Asian. There was someone of color that was on the mantle. So for us to assume that all white men, 60 to 75, would have no point of reference to your client is flawed logic. I think we've come a long way, because I would venture to say that if those statistics were done 25 years ago, that would not be the case. There would not be the diversity on the mantle that you see today. So, Ms. Padwell, I agree with you that we got a long way to go. I think that there are some steps that are being taken in the right direction. And I think that the unfortunate circumstances that Mr. Floyd had to go through has given us all an opportunity to re-examine where we really are on the issue of race relations.
But another thing is, more people have to accept that this does exist. Racism does exist. There are many people that say racism does not exist. There is no systemic racism in this country or whatever. Those people are living in a world that's not real. And they have either been taught it or they've lived it, but it is not. It does exist, and you have to accept it first. That's the first step. In this movement right now, what I notice is in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the protests, the people in the street, you saw black and white. 2/3 were black. You watch the TV today, you will see there is a diverse group of people. The black people are almost in the minority in a lot of these marches and protests that are going on today. That's telling me that people are beginning to see that what we have said all my 75 years is true. It does exist. These things do happen. That's what it's telling me. You know, I kind of see it now. And without the media and without television, and I hate to say this, without the pandemic, it wouldn't have happened, because all those people out in the street, if it were not for the pandemic, they would be working. They would be in their offices. They wouldn't know what really happened. They wouldn't hear all of the stories over and over again. They would have been watching basketball and football and golf and NASCAR. But in the last how many weeks, everybody have watched the same thing. And that some of them have finally heard it. And then they finally saw it. So had it not been for the media and for the pandemic, I'm not sure. But the thing that has given me some hope is the diversity of those marchers and those protests today. It really has. And not only in the US, and that's another thing that amazes me, all over the world, you know. And when you look at the people all over the world, they're not black, some of them are. So it's telling me that people are really saying, you know, this thing does exist, or at least we do have to acknowledge it now, or it is time that we really do work on it and do something about it, because if not, we are destroying ourselves. We are destroying our own world. It doesn't take another country now to come to war with us. We are destroying ourselves.
And all of us too, right?
All of us.
I think, like, this current fight to, confront and name racism.
Mm-hmm.
This is for all of us. This is for all of our souls, right? Like, racism touches and harms and hurts all of us. And that, I think in many ways we're kind of fighting for this soul of humanity.
Right, exactly. I agree. Yeah.
And to see the diversity and to know, at least for us and our home church, here we are, and we have this diverse community. And so I think that we do have reason to be hopeful. Yeah.
But I guess we do need to, we don't know how our congregation feels, or, and I know you said, what will be our next step, and it's something, because this is just a few of us here, and we don't know how, well, I do know how people are feeling because I've talked to lots of people, and they kind of know how I feel because I've talked to lots of people on the phone. And and the thing is, it's not funny, but it makes me smile and it makes me laugh when one of my white friends will say, well, Pat, I'm so sorry, and this has happened to you, and like, didn't you know it before? Or did you just realize it right now? I mean, why is it that you realize it now? Or why are you apologizing to me now? Or, and that's harsh of me probably, but some people have just not spoken up. And I think today people are beginning to speak up. I think that's the difference. People before have just kept quiet and not become a part of what's happening. But today more people are willing to step forth and put words into action. And I think that's the main thing. And this generation that's coming up now, they are fantastic. And I think this is the generation that is going to change towards the Jelanis and the Kobe's and the ones graduated from college this year and the high school kids. Remember the high school kids when they were killing kids in school, and how these kids spoke up? It's this generation that is going to change the world. And they are speaking up, and they are not backing down. And by the time my generation is gone, and it's going to get better. It's going to get better, but my only regret is that I won't live to see it probably, And that's when I start to think of, I do believe in life after death, because I am going to be able to come back and look down and see how it has changed and what has happened. And when I start talking like that, people say, okay, Pat, here you go. You're going off the deep end again. But
okay, Pat. So as we wrap up, this is the invitation, right, for the small group of us here, and for everyone else who will hear and get to see this conversation. This Methodists love to create like committees and teams and stuff like that. Well, this is not like our team to fix the racial problems of Prince William County or America or the world or whatever, right? This is, we're just the starting point. And so this is an invitation to join in the conversation, and whatever that looks like, in ways that are physically distant right now. But this is the time to, if you have stories and you want to share them, if you have ideas of things that we can do, things that are actionable. Honestly, just having conversations about race and reminding people that you can have conversations about race in polite company, and it doesn't have to, it shouldn't have to be like this where it's like, oh, it's a current event and it's timely and now we can talk about it. It should be more like what Pat was talking about with Black History Month. Like, we shouldn't have to have an excuse or a reason to raise up pieces of history that so many of us don't even know about. And right, we white people don't know history either, right? It's a whitewashed, it's called whitewashed for a reason, right? Just the altered kind of view of history where we don't get to see these things and hear different voices and stuff like that. And so just, this is an invitation to continue the work and to continue the conversation. And it's late, and I appreciate all of you for coming to this virtual table, for coming with your full selves, with your vulnerability, with your questions and your stories and your comments that you might have thought would be controversial. But I'm grateful for your honesty and integrity and your bravery in sharing those stories.
it's good. And a beginning. It's a beginning. It's a start.
Can we end with prayer?
Absolutely. Would you like to close us out?
Oh, a little pressure, but okay. I talk to God every day, so I can talk to God in front of you guys. It works for me. Dear Lord, we're very thankful that we can come together and have these kinds of conversations as to how to make the world that you created for us a better place. We thank you for our diversity. We thank you for our ability to converse. We pray for our world and we pray for our country as we confront the issues that we have to confront. We pray that the words that we shared tonight might have an influence on someone and make them have a better understanding of the importance of the acceptance of all people. We thank you and praise you that we have Good Shepherd United Methodist Church. We thank you for our Pastor Sarah. We thank you for our Pastor Ben Pratt. We thank you for all the people who have made up the fiber of this great church that we're able to celebrate your name in. We give praise and glory for you and always ask everything that we ask for and that we do in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.